Welcome to Weekly Takes, episode number 2. This is my new mini-cast that covers a few topics that I spotted throughout the week I found interesting, but condenses them into shorter takes instead of full-on commentary videos. I save those for things I feel need a bit of a deeper dive. We're going to start out today with the European Union requiring smartphones to have user access to the batteries. I actually think this is a really necessary thing that's very cool. There's very few things that I agree with the EU on, and this would definitely be one of them. I'm not an iPhone user, but previously they required the iPhone switch to a standard USB-C port on their devices instead of the Lightning port. I think the vast majority of consumers would agree that this was a good move for them, kind of universalize things. But in this case with the batteries, this is really awesome because so many of our devices, they seem to die prematurely because of battery life. I have a phone right now that I actually really like, and I've had for a couple of years now, and it still has a fairly up-to-date version of Android. It has Android 12. It has all the features I need. It does everything like I need to, and I just don't have the desire or money right now to replace the device. However, I have started to notice the battery life slowly but surely over time getting worse and worse. And this is considering this is actually a phone that was touted as having a very large and long-lasting battery. That was one of the reasons I bought it. And for the first year or so, it was really good. I could pretty much use it for about 2 days without even having to charge it if I needed to. However, like almost all of our devices, the lithium-ion batteries, there's only so many times that they charge and recharge, and they still remain viable. They do eventually die over time. They do eventually get to a point where they don't hold a charge as well or for as long a time. However, with the devices being fully completely self-contained, unlike our phones of the past, because I've been using cell phones, since they became a mainstream thing, almost all devices previously, you could change out batteries. You could have backup batteries and swap them out. Like instead of, oh man, my phone's going dead, instead of having to go charge it or turn it off, well, you could just pop in your spare battery and then later charge them. We slowly but surely got away from that over the last 10 and then maybe 5 years especially, where almost all smartphones have an internal battery that cannot be changed without cracking the device open, and either voiding your warranty or doing damage to the device in some way that you can't fix yourself. So I think it's really cool. I think it would be awesome, especially with the advances in battery technology. We should be able to have smaller, thinner, lighter batteries anyways. So having it so that there is a way to potentially slide one in and out of a device like this could bring some more innovation, honestly, where your device, the way that you might eject and remove a SIM card or an SD card, you may be able to do this with a battery at some point. At the very least, have a panel that is removable, that pops off. The last phone I had that I could do that was actually a Windows phone, and it was awesome. Although they eventually got to a point too where the batteries were fully integrated. So in a win for the EU, a rare win for the European Parliament, they approved new rules covering the design, production, recycling of all rechargeable batteries sold within the EU. This went over things like electric cars and vehicles and stuff like that as well. But it covered portable batteries for devices such as smartphones, tablets, and cameras. And so we must be able to, quote, easily remove and replace them. And it will require drastic design rethink by manufacturers. And the thing is, typically when you have a major economy that does these things, it carries over to almost all of them. You're not going to have them redesign their devices and their manufacturing process for just the European Union. They're going to carry that over to the US. So almost guaranteed, this would mean devices in the US would also get this kind of treatment, and I think it would be awesome. The next subject is going to be representation in entertainment. I know this can be a touchy subject, but I saw a tweet from @DiscussingFilm on Twitter it was showing Pedro Pascal saying basically the best way to continue representation is casting a, quote, person in a role that isn't limiting a character to racial identity, unquote. And then he says, quote, especially if it's an IP we're familiar with, people get so butthurt about this stuff, but who cares, unquote. And Pedro Pascal is, of course, in The Mandalorian. He was in the film with Nicolas Cage called The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. I have not seen that. It does look awesome. I plan to see it at some point. And of course, right now he is in the series The Last of Us, based off of the PlayStation video game. But I just take so much issue with this statement here, because what he's talking about is kind of the inverse of how things should be working. Number one, if you have an established character, you want to look for the absolute best person to continue on that role. Racial identity is in fact a factor. It is a part of casting a character if that character is pre-established. We see this, of course, in many cases. There's been debate over 007, James Bond. We've seen this in many movies and films where they have changed the racial identity of the character or the gender of the character for the sake of doing so. And that's the problem. It's not that we found somebody who was just so fantastic in the role as an actor for that specific character that we said we have to put them there regardless of the fact that they're not the same race as the character was previously. It's when you're doing this, it actually becomes the opposite. The merit of the actor, the merit of how well they can play the role is not what's being considered. They are in fact casting for racial identity. And people get butthurt about that because they know that's what's going on. They know you're not picking the best person for the role. They know that you're trying to fill your quotas for whatever, I'll use the word woke, but whatever narrative it is you're trying to push with your show or your movie or your video game. The vast majority of the time, it's completely unnecessary, but they do it just to frustrate people and just to make it a thing because they're trying to score those brownie points. Now, here's the thing. Speaking of 007, my personal opinion on that is, first of all, Daniel Craig is my favorite 007 of all time. There are going to be people who have an issue with that because they're longtime fans, whatever. I don't care. I generally agree, like I said, that you should have someone who looks like the character previously. You should have somebody that kind of embodies all the main features of a character if they're previously established. However, I think Idris Elba would have been an absolutely perfect choice to play James Bond 007 in a future series. Unfortunately, I believe they've said that he's basically too old for it, and they want to go with somebody who's not quite to that age level. I mean, Daniel Craig was getting kind of older by the time they finished his series. So in this case, when I seen Idris Elba, with all the films I've watched him in and everything I've paid attention to with his career, and he is in fact from the UK, I basically go, yeah, this guy, based on his acting chops, based on his personality, his swagger, like, he could totally pull off 007, and I would 100% be there for it. The problem is when they do these things, that's not the mindset. The mindset is more of how can we, essentially change things and erase previous history because we can. They want to fill a racial identity or a gender quota, whatever it is. And so it's not based on merit. It's not based on talent. It's not based on, is this the best option? It's based on those skin deep things. That is in fact racist. Third, but definitely not least, I want to talk about the current Xbox FTC situation as Microsoft attempts to acquire Activision Blizzard. We've already gone through a lot of this process overseas, and in many places they approved the sale, but here in the US they've run up against some biases in the FTC and some weird reasonings as well. because the FTC stands to ensure competition. It doesn't exist to make sure a company doesn't grow or spend money or purchase things. It's there to ensure competition. It's not, in the case of Microsoft purchasing Activision, yes, it's a massive buy. Yes, it gives Microsoft a lot of control over a lot of major IPs and brands and things like that. But when you look at the market in which Microsoft inhabits when it comes to gaming with the Xbox brand, it's across console and PC. They currently sit third in that market in console sales, and then when it comes to like overall money, I believe they do better because of Game Pass and services, and like I said, across PC. The Xbox brand is actually very healthy, but in most ways you can measure it, they sit third in the industry. Nintendo is way out in front of everybody, but Nintendo is very casual, affordable, and is also seen as like a secondary factor. Most people who own an Xbox or PlayStation, they aren't usually going to buy the other when it comes to Xbox or PlayStation, but they'll also buy a Nintendo because everybody wants to play some Mario, Zelda, Pokemon, whatever. And it's also, in this case, a handheld, so it kind of goes second to the console that they primarily sit down to game on. Whether that's PlayStation or Xbox, that's where you play like the majority of your games. There's, of course, a hardcore Nintendo fan base and people who just buy Nintendo because they're more on the casual side of things. But, so of course, Nintendo's like way out in front in that regard. PlayStation would be next. They sell a lot of their consoles. They have some big hit games. And it's kind of strange to see the FTC treat an American company like Microsoft and their brand Xbox as if they should not be making moves to try and compete better with a Japanese company in Sony and their PlayStation brand. And it's like they're defending this overseas brand from American competition. That's a very weird position for the FTC to be in. I don't think it'll win out. I think in the end, Microsoft's case is a lot better than FTC's is. And you also have probably the majority of Activision brands and IPs that are going to remain multi-platform anyways. What it does do is it gives Microsoft another channel of revenue, lots more resources for their gaming. You'll have all these additional studios who can make things specifically for Xbox and can share their technology and expertise with each other, much like Bethesda and the other Xbox game studios do now. And you have Game Pass, whether it's all the Call of Duty games or potentially future games like StarCraft or what am I thinking of? Diablo, things like that coming to Game Pass. Well, instead of having to go make a deal with Activision, well, you own Activision and can bring it to Game Pass, adding further value to the platform and the services. Therefore, giving you some way to compete with Sony, who has a lot of exclusive games, and though I feel many are overrated, I just feel like it's a very strange place for the FTC to be in, and I don't think, like I said, I don't think they'll win out. I feel like it's one of those things where their case is not a very good one, and Microsoft has a lot of money and very good lawyers. So in the end, most of what the Activision purchase does is it gives accessibility to Xbox game studios, and it gives more content for the Game Pass system. It doesn't necessarily take anything from PlayStation. However, Sony has apparently said that if Microsoft acquires Activision, they will not share PlayStation 6 details with Activision. Which really, I feel like would just be shooting themselves in the foot, because if games like Call of Duty and other Activision titles are going to continue coming out multi-platform, you still want them to have the best information for building those games for your platform. I feel like at that point, you just give them further incentive to either give you gimped versions or not put things on your console. So it really would be just shooting yourself in the foot and looking petty in general. And then if you're a PlayStation gamer, a Sony consumer, how do you sit there and justify that? How do you not go, whoa, what do you mean? Just because Microsoft buys Activision doesn't mean I don't want to play the best Call of Duty I can on my next PlayStation. So they'd be harming their own people. However, that's par for the course with Sony. For at least a generation and a half, Sony has been the least consumer-friendly brand in gaming. And it's pretty obvious out there, whether it's pricing, how they handle their services, what they don't make available to their consumers, just all features, access, across the board. Sony currently is the least consumer-friendly brand in gaming in the major console space. Thanks again for checking out Weekly Takes. If you enjoyed this minicast, please subscribe to the channel for more. Check out the playlist for past episodes. Leave a like, and if you have anything to say, any feedback, definitely leave a comment, and we'll see you next week.